TK, I read your story.
Huh.
Your story. It is very good actually. That I wanted to just send text to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. It was very interesting. So I believe we met last time when actually Salis and you with this.
Namaste and greetings. I, Sukta Behra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on Amrit Kaal and the Union Budget 2023-24. This discussion is organized by the Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE, as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of Public Finance Towards Accountability. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget, fiscal year 2023-24, being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair and moderator for today's session is Professor Nilanjan Banik, Professor and Program Director, Economics, Mahindra University, Hyderabad, and Visiting Consultant, IMPRI. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
The panelists for today's session are Mr. T.K. Arun, Senior Journalist and Columnist based in Delhi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, PhD, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, New Delhi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And last but not the least, we have Dr. Rajesh Shukla, Managing Director and CEO, People Research on India's Consumer Economy, PRICE, ICE 360, Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you.
Now, without further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Professor Nilanjan Banik to start the program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Tripta. Thank you, IMPRI, for organizing this very topical issue. So today we are going to talk about the union budget. And the best part of this discussion is we are having three gentlemen. Typically, as an economist, we believe that there is a macro side of the story, there is a micro side of the story, and also there is something in between. Now, from the layman perspective, budget deals with allocating money towards areas where government thinks it is essential to spend and finding out ways such as taxes to finance it. That is the layman definition. Tax is an important source of government revenue, although there are others way to fund the government revenue. For instance, you may have heard that last year, Air India got sold. So that is another way. So it's what we say in a layman's term is disinvesting the public sector undertaking. Government also gets money by providing services. For instance, when you avail any public services, bus, railway, you pay for the fare. That is also another way the government earn money. Now within tax, you have both tax, direct tax, you also have indirect tax. Although indirect tax does not come per se under the budget, it is under the GST Council. So yesterday we did not hear that many things or none about the GST part of it, but we did hear about something which will give some, I would say, boost to the consumption demand, in particular for the middle class. Government in that way has, whether they have done a remarkable job in terms of the spending part, because the other part of the spending that we are going to talk about is how the government is going to spend on social sector, such as building more primary school or hospitals, water, sanitation, or for that matter, We have been hearing about the CapEx. CapEx is about capital expenditure, how much government is spending on physical infrastructure, for instance, railways, roads, airports, and more importantly, whether the government is able to transfer fund to the poor and the deprived. Because these days, what you see is, going by some of the report, for instance, the Oxfam report suggests that in India, the concern is that of growing income inequality. Okay, so the how this budget stand as a good or bad. As I said in my opening remark, you have a macro part of the story. For that, we have Mr. T.K. Arun, who is a senior journalist. I've been following his writing over the last donkey's year, I think over the last 20 or 25 years. And every time I get something new out of his writing. We have, to talk about the micro side of the story, we have Dr. Rajesh Shukla. He is sitting with wealth of data on consumer expenditure. And today I was reading his column in Times of India, where he's saying that the middle has now become the richer class in a way. So we are going to look forward, trying to get a sense of that. Also from the industry side of the story, to hear the industry part of the story, which is in between, as I would say, between macro and micro. We have our chief economist from PhD Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Sharma. Now, before I pass it on to them, I'm trained as an economist, and economists always have two sides of the story. The first is the good side of the story, and the other is not so good side of the story. Now, yesterday, many people, in particular from the industry, in particular from the policy world, they believe that the budget is good. Now, why they say so? Because you will find that there has been an increment in capital expenditure. Now, you may also have heard that IMF and World Bank both have given kudos to India's growth, because it is now the fastest growing large economy in the world. So in that way, India stand out from other economies, be it China, be it the economies in Europe, or for that matter, even the US. Now, one reason for India to sustain this higher economic growth has to do with the fact that during the last budget, our FM has given a big boost to the capital expenditure, which I just now mentioned, towards building roads, ports, airport. So in terms of connectivity, so as an economist, how I see this, in terms of connectivity, this is a great stuff. Even this year, this thing has been increased from 7.5 lakh crore to almost 10 lakh crores. And as I was reading TK's piece, if you add other stuff, it goes up to as 13 lakh crores. Now, these are good numbers. Now, as I said, that as an economist, there are two sides of the story. The first side of the story is it is going to generate more income, because if you follow Keynes, they are saying that if you are building roads, ports, or airport, you tend to employ people maybe who are not that skilled. Okay, so they are going to lead into more income generation. It is going to build more roads, ports, and airports. Also, because of higher allocation to the railway sector, it is also going to improve the connectivity. So who are the people who gains from the connectivity part of the story? It is the industry. Why? Because industry always will require this physical infrastructure, be it to reach to the domestic market, or for that matter, reaching to the international market. So the cost of travel from the ports, airports to the factory comes down. So in that way, it's also a good news for the industry. Now, because industry, the cost of doing business has become easier, you may also think that the industry, our manufacturing sector, may have become more productive. So that is another good side of the story. But now come to the other side, which is the not so good side of the story. What if there is not of adequate demand? Because what we see in this budget is most of the talk has been for the maybe upper 50 percentile of the population. Now, if you don't have adequate income for the bottom 50 percentile of the population, which means, and by the way, this bottom 50 percentile of the population are the one with higher marginal propensity to consume. These are the people who actually are the important pillar for India's aggregate demand. Now, if you don't actually give enough of incentive to this bottom side of the people in the bottom side of the pyramid, what is going to happen is they maybe are not going to spend that much, and if they are not going to spend that much, although the government is building all this fantastic infrastructure, the industry, the private entrepreneurs, they might not get enough of incentive to produce, because if you don't have a demand, you don't like to produce, irrespective of what is your capacity, right? So that's the other side of the story. In fact, there is a study, recent study, which showcased that it is the poor people, or the people in the bottom 40 percentile of the population, who actually spend more on domestic goods and services. And India has a huge chunk of domestic market. In particular, if I'm looking into the consumables by this bottom 40 percentile of the population, these are actually, in fact, produced by the MSME sector, which are more into labor-intensive mode of production. Because if I'm talking about the capital-intensive mode of production, this is the story of the big industry. But if I'm talking about the job creation, if I'm talking about reaching the Bharat, reaching the rural area, trying to understand how to sustain this demand, how to sustain this growth of 6.5% for the next fiscal, what is very much essential is how we ensure job trickling down to the rural area, how we are going to ensure job for the not so skilled type of laborers, how we are going to ensure that the purchasing power of the people in the rural area remains intact. Okay, so that is the other side of the story. And I look forward hearing from our three experts, both the good side and the not so good side of the story when it comes to the discussion. Finally, before I pass it on to our esteemed panelists, there are other part of the budget. For instance, if I'm looking into the fund which were allocated during the previous fiscal year, for instance, although government is spending or allocating so much fund, but many times what happens is, because of a problem with land allocation, because of problem with the state part of the story, you see that not many funds are getting utilized, which means in spite of the good case in point would be that of, I don't want to bring the political side of the story, but somehow it comes, the good case in point is when you hear that in the government of West Bengal complaining that they are not getting enough fund for Narega scheme. Now, if you talk to the people in the central government, they will tell you that there is no proper audit, and they believe that maybe the fund which are allocated for the Narega scheme are being used elsewhere. Okay, so the challenge for the government therefore is both at the central and at the level of the state is to how to ensure that this money which are allocated in a more direct way, so that we can stop the leakage. Now, the good part again is I keep on shuffling between good and bad part, because as an economist, we are trained to do that, is when I hear that in the recent budget, you see that the effort and attempt has been made, and we are seeing already the benefit to connect Aadhaar with PAN, with ration card, so as to stop this kind of leakages and to ensure that the money which are being used actually reach to the section of the economy which actually need the most. Now, you should also keep in mind the government has to do all this thing, keeping in mind that the fiscal deficit do not cross beyond a certain limit, because if you are investing into capacity which are not so productive, and yet your fiscal side or the deficit is increasing, that is bound to lead to inflation. And inflation is the last thing that we want at this point of time, because most part of the growth or the inflation numbers that we see, whether it is CPI or WPI, you will find that most part of it is fueled by what we call imported inflation. Why? Because India is a growing economy, and we do need to depend on fossil fuel at this point of time. Again, the good side of the story is government has also allocated a handsome amount of money towards green energy and to the alternative source of energy. So these are some of the talking points with which maybe we can start the discussion. So the mode of our discussion today is I will first invite TK to give us the macro side of the story. And by all means, you can also get into the micro side of the story, because I remember once reading one of your column where you said that fiscal deficit during bad time is one thing, and the same fiscal deficit during good time is another thing. Okay, so maybe we can build on that. Then maybe I will ask Dr. Shukla to give the micro side of the story, which is how or why he feels that the consumption spending, by the way, consumption spending is the most important side of aggregate demand. As we speak, it explains almost 59% of our aggregate demand. So we want to know from him in what way the tax cut in the present yesterday's budget is going to help us with this consumption side of the story. And finally, I'm going to pass on the baton to Dr. Sharma, who is going to talk about what he feels about the industry, what industry feel about this, and whether are we going to see some more capacity utilization in years to come. So without further ado, let me invite TK. TK, it's all over yours.
Thanks, Nilanjan. How long should I speak?
I think 15 or 20 minutes, but we'd love to hear you.
10 to 15.
Thank you. Now, I think I should begin by looking at the background, the context to the budget. In 2016-17, the Indian economy grew 8%, which is a fairly decent rate of growth. However, in the November of 2016-17, the government announced what it called a master stroke. It demonetized high-value currencies. The growth in the following year dropped to 6.2%. Next year, it became 5.8%. The decline continued to 3.8%. Sorry, 3.8%. Now, this steep decline in growth rate is the background to the absolute decline in the size of the economy during the pandemic. Now, it is from this that we have to rebuild and recover. In 2021-22, CSO, the Central Statistics Office, tells us the economy was just 2.9% higher than in the pre-pandemic 2019-20. It is in this situation that we find that the demand for Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme is still very active and vibrant. Now, Prime Minister Modi had once described this NREGA scheme as a monument to state failure. Now, the demand for this monument to state failure is on the rise in November and December of 2022, which means there is considerable rural distress in large parts of India. So it is in this background that we have this budget this year. The global economy is probably slowing, perhaps not as badly as had been feared initially. Commodity prices have come down some bit. And as the chief economic advisor pointed out, if there is global economic slowdown, vital commodity prices will be moderate. And that will be useful for India if India is in a position to make use of these lower prices to add its investment capacity. The government has allocated 13.5 lakh crore rupees, 13.7 lakh crore rupees to capital expenditure in this budget, including the grants in aid of capital formation. Now, all capital expenditure doesn't build hard additional infrastructure or productive capacity. If you use some money to repay a past loan, that is capital expenditure, but doesn't add to capacity. If you give a fresh loan to a state government or to a PSU to repay its past loans, that doesn't add to capacity, although it is capital expenditure. So we need to be very clear that while we are happy that this 13.7 lakh crore of capital expenditure is going to take place, it should be primarily on forming hard productive capital, fixed capital. what kind of projects are chosen is very key. If you choose a project that doesn't lead to domestic job creation, domestic procurement of material, that also will have a very poor multiplier effect on the economy. But to the extent you have, say, construction, road, railway, machinery, things like that, you will see demand for not only labor, but also steel produced by Indian companies, cement produced by Indian companies, earth moving equipment produced by Indian companies, trucks produced by Indian companies, which in turn will generate its own multiplier effects, and the economy should benefit. So selection of the projects on which this capital expenditure will be spent is very, very key. Now, as far as rural demand is concerned, we have some example from a fairly recent past when rural demand actually went up very sharply. Between 2008 and 2014, real rural wages, that is after taking into account inflation, went up steadily for 6 continuous years. This has happened very rarely in India's past. And this happened primarily not because of rural prosperity or agricultural prosperity, but because of construction, a construction boom in towns. Large numbers of rural labor migrate to the cities to take up construction jobs, where the wages are higher than in rural areas. So that raised their wages. Once some of the underemployed labor left the agriculture sector, rural wages for agriculture also went up. We must also understand that today, only about 50% of agriculture value added comes from crops. The remaining comes from animal husbandry, fisheries, forestry, things like that, which have also a different kind of labor profile and labor requirement, which is somewhat more skilled than pure agricultural labor. So if with this 13.7 lakh crore of investment, the government builds up a construction boom, that will actually draw some of the labor still sticking around in rural areas back to the towns, back to the cities, and their wages will go up. And in sympathy, wages will go up in rural areas as well. That should drive up consumption demand across the country. So that should be how it should pan out. Now, about the fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is pegged at 5.9% of GDP, which I think is a good number. But it's not just the fiscal deficit that matters. The overall size of the budget is very key. In the pre-pandemic years, India's budget averaged 13% of GDP. It was fairly small. Actually, it has been our experience that the tax to GDP ratio has touched a peak of 17%. It stays there. It hasn't gone up. So the only way you can raise your total spending is by borrowing more. Of course, there is some non-tax receipts, but that's not a whole lot. So it is by increasing the fiscal deficit that we have been able to raise the level of the overall total expenditure of the budget. Now, this is in 2021-22, this reached 16% of GDP, which is a welcome level. That was brought down to 15% last year, and now in this budget, it has been proposed to be pegged at 14.9%, which is virtually 15% of GDP. So that is a sizable total expenditure, and that should boost demand overall, not just the capital expenditure. I think we should mind that. Secondly, this worry about the fiscal deficit is actually, to a large extent, artificial. At a time when private sector demand for investment is lax, is very, very quiet, savings are available for the government to mop up without creating a strain on the availability of savings for the private sector. The fiscal deficit actually is a matter of concern when, through the fiscal deficit, the government is trying to take off the savings that the private sector wants for its own use. But since right now, the private sector is not seeing any use for these savings, if the government takes them and builds capacity, that will only drive in private investment. So that will be reinforcing of the investment impulse in the economy. So the fiscal deficit being 5.9% is not a matter of concern at all. And as the economic survey has been at pains to point out from Dr. Subramanian's time, what really matters is that the nominal rate of growth of the economy should be higher than the nominal cost of capital. So if that happens, what happens is that the output will grow faster than the cost of capital, which means the share of interest payment and debt in the GDP will come down because the output is growing faster, right? So long as this condition is met, even if the government borrows money, it doesn't do any harm to the economy. And on that score, I wouldn't worry too much. There is no excess demand in the system. We only have an insufficient demand. And if the government comes forward to increase the demand by borrowing the available savings in the system, that is only to boost the economy. Now, while this is the overall story, we must also see some, deficiencies in the budget. Many people have praised the budget as being, as one that eschews populism. This is the first full budget before the elections, and you don't see many populist, giveaways and so on and so forth in this budget. Now, this is not an entirely accurate description of the budget. See, the point is that, as I said just now, after a series of ever declining growth rates and a pandemic afflicted dip in the absolute size of the economy, the government needs to show that it can actually generate growth. Before it goes to the elections, it is vital as a political purpose to demonstrate that the government is actually capable of generating positive growth, not just recovering from a dip in the economy because of the pandemic, but in a normal year, it can grow. And therefore, it does make sense to focus attention on utilizing whatever money it has on investment and generating growth. So you must see this focus on capital expenditure also as a politically correct way of spending money, which will actually help the electoral prospects of the ruling dispensation. At the same time, various schemes that the government thinks will help it get re-elected, such as the pipe water supply to homes scheme, is being fully funded. There is a huge increase in the outlay by, I think, 79,000 crore in public this government housing schemes, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and Pravas Mantri Urban Awas Yojana. So it's not that the government is neglecting the giveaway part of the political project in the pre-election year. That is also being taken care of. But because growth will suit the need of political presentation in the run-up to the election, the government is focused on growth, which is only beneficial to the Indian economy and to the people at large. Now, we must not take note of one thing, which many people really have not taken note of. There was a time when this government used to speak of minimum government, maximum governance. It used to be critical of the past when the government policy was to occupy the commanding heights of the economy. Today, the state is making a re-entry, decided, determined re-entry into virtually everything. The government was to set up 5G service research. The government was to set up biotechnology research centers in ICMR. India's scientific bureaucracy is notorious. It doesn't allow any autonomous scientists. It doesn't throttles creativity. There's the only reason why Indian talent flourishes when it goes outside the country, but remains fairly unproductive within this country. By the time you are serious enough to occupy a level that is at a decision-making capacity, that person has stopped to be, productive as a researcher. But he will control researchers and stifle their creativity. That is the general trend in Indian scientific establishment, although, of course, there are honorable exceptions. So you don't need to actually promote biotechnology by bringing scientists under the ICMR. You need to give incentives for Indian scientists working around the world to come to India, set up their own labs, not an ICMR, with complete autonomy, and take advantage of the coming boom in biotech across the world. Similarly, the government wants to be there in promoting products. You want to build malls in every district, government sponsored. Why? This urge for the government to be itself directly a player in the economy beyond what is required is actually counterproductive. 75,000 crore is what the government wants to spend on filling connectivity, logistical gaps to move fertilizer, cement, food grains, all that, steel. This is welcome. However, the role of the private sector is put at just 1/5, 15,000 crore. Now, the movement of these things is essentially a commercial activity. Moving steel, moving cement, moving fertilizer, these are all commercial activities. Why should the government be the one to, support this? You provide coherent policy and an enabling framework. The private sector will be more than happy to come and invest in it. So this activist role that the government seems to be assuming that it needs to play is a throwback to era which then was relevant, but might not be relevant now when there are functional markets. Now, another dark side which needs to be taken into account is that when you need to invest large scale in building infrastructure and you want to involve the private sector in that, you need to have a vibrant market for corporate debt, which we don't have. We have seen with the Adani fiasco, there is a large exposure of Indian banks to this company. Now, Adani is no fly-by operator. He's a solid businessman who has built large chunks of the Indian economy's infrastructure, and he might or might not have brought inflated share prices and all that, but let us also concede that he is a very capable entrepreneur who is good at execution and who thinks big and executes brilliantly. However, the very large exposure of Indian banks to this one single company has created a systemic risk. Now, why should banks be exposed to very large projects? It should be the debt market, the bond market that should be financing large-scale infrastructure. But we don't have that. There's a market for government bonds itself is, struggling, and we have virtually non-existent market for corporate debt. Now, it is in these kind of things that the government should actually play a very constructive role in creating and building and facilitating the growth of a corporate debt market. That will help infrastructure grow. So that task remains unaddressed in this current budget, where the government itself wants to do everything. Let me stop now. We can discuss it later.
Yeah, that's fine. In fact, what TK is pointing out to a few things, and that we'll be discussing in our concluding section. First is why rural demand has fallen. Second is in what way government deficit is sustainable. Third point is that in why the government is intervening too much into the market right now. And fourth point is the financial part of it, that in a way that due to lack of corporate debt or market, we are seeing problem like what we see happening with Adani. So these are the main takeaway, and we are going to discuss more about it in our concluding section. Now, let me invite Dr. Shukla. Maybe you can take another 20 minutes and tell us more about the consumption side of the story, please.
Thank you, Niranjan. And let me start saying that you can say the foundation described by our friend TK. And let me take what is my area of, you can say, what I know little bit about the Indian consumer economy, particularly looking at what TK has mentioned, the Indian economy, actually in terms of like last 6-7 years, how it is, you can say, behaving in terms of growth, inclusion, and other things. So ultimately, it is impacting the last mile, you can say, in the society. And if I will go by the means like that, just taking 1 or 2 points what TK has already described in terms of like looking at the numbers, whatever it is available from the government or from the international reputed agencies, economy is getting disrupted by the various actually the measures, either it is natural or some of the things for last 3-4 years. And the growth is actually the particularly disrupted badly by the pandemic. And the pandemic in terms of like and the, if I can recall the what I can just say what John Eckert has mentioned, that the like how the future is going to unfold. So he has mentioned 2 things, which is purely correct. Like the tomorrow will be the different from today, and the tomorrow's fate is completely depending on what we are going to do today. So in that context, if we look actually the whatever disruption happened, the yesterday's budget, what actually the government has presented, I just see that the in that context, what were the actually our expectation from the budget, and the keeping the all you can say the like implementation problem and the peculiar problem or the whatever the advantage or disadvantage we are having for the ages, keeping that actually into base of this budget can be like the as you mentioned in the beginning, that it is appreciated, it is something like the somebody has critical about something like it is one can just say that in the overall budget actually the people are saying okay, there are certain things happened which is not happened last 6-7 years, like the taxes and taxes rebate are the sum of the, but it is important to look at these things, how it impact the individual household sector. So what I would like to, there are 6-7 pillars actually identified, categorically mentioned by the finance minister. I will take the first 2 actually, which is important to like inclusive development, and the second is the reaching to the last mile. So India is actually taking that, if suppose, and the where I am coming is the most recently you might be actually the reading a lot of the stories coming India's middle class, and the middle class, you can say as a concept, middle class as life style, middle class as a size is always matter of debate. But let me also say that it is because of 2 reasons and the why it is important. If we recall what Aristotle has mentioned actually in his actually in the best political community is formed by the citizen of middle class, and those states are likely to be well administered in which the middle class is large. So if looking that, so still it is very relevant in the economy like India. And now it is used by the various people, means like as you mentioned, middle class is something like the, if anything happen in the policy of that environment, so it is like the middle class is suffering. So middle class is now the tax rebate, middle class is getting advantage. Middle class is influenced most by the actually inflation. Middle class is actually suffering from the certain other thing. Middle class is advantage. Middle class is creating a lot of, you can say, the positive things in the political discourse. So a lot, but these middle class is where the actually confusion is. It is defined in different way by different people, but we don't know which middle class, who is referring which middle class when action comes. So coming to that, Where I can come is my recent, actually, the publication, The Rise of Middle Class, which is actually the now available. Let me say that this is a fact-based and the primary database report. It is nothing to do with any actually the like, let me say that any modeling or any, it is coming from the data itself, covered from the 200,000 household across the country, 25 states, rural and urban. And it is measured through the, you can say, the very, very scientific way. And the first report was published in the 2004. And based on that, there are several reports, actually, the quoted like bird of gold, this and that. Although these people like the mention the, you can say, reference of the NCR, another thing, just like a five font size. Okay, this is work, but this is where actually the middle class is defined. Let me come to the actually the, so what our result is showing, looking at the economics on one side, on supply side, like GDP growth. Either it is 6 or 7, but I recall I wrote actually in Economic Times 10 years before that the growth and inflation is highly correlated. Means in the society like India, as you mentioned, you will see that the income inequality or the expenditure inequality. Income data is rarest of rare, but still I will say there are sufficient income data existing in the country, but it is sometimes unnoticed actually, because it is outside the government actually. So if nothing is from the government, so people are even hesitate to quote even in the part of the policy making. So why I'm saying this, if you look at in like the 2015-16, the income inequality, what we have calculated from our data was approximately 0.36, and which is currently, when we have actually the looking at the post-pandemic, it is touching around 0.5 actually. So it is, our data is also showing, but important thing is that there are reason why actually we have to look at this one. It is good or bad, because one has to look at because of the poorest of poor got affected badly by the pandemic. And whatever growth has happened, it is from the salary class or those who are having actually, and these are the people from the above 60-70% percentile. So I'm saying that in whatever growth has happened, either it is negative, it is happened on the top actually. Not. So coming not to that, but interesting thing is that actually they're looking at the budget, the way like Sitaraman has mentioned, it is actually the expected. It is expected to give the relief. Looking at the whatever leaving, as you mentioned, the political compulsion and this and that, but this was very much necessary. And let me say why. In the 2021 survey, we have asked actually 3 important questions to the Indian household. Compared to pre-COVID period, what is the current level of your household income? So 1/4 of middle class have mentioned that their income has gone down or there is no income. Okay. Second question we have asked, if your family income is lower or no income, what is the major reason of incline, the income decline? The major reason was salary cut, job loss, business loss, or the less income from the source. So it is directly, indirectly showing to a lot of things have happened where the actually middle class lost their source of income. And when we have asked how much your income has lost, majority of them has mentioned it is 25 to 50% of their income. So you can see that what we are saying from our data, and to just say that the important thing is the current middle class size is approximately 30%. And what we are defining, it is global middle class, not the Indian middle class. Global middle class, when we are saying, if you convert 5 lakh to 30 lakh rupees annual household income, in terms of PPP term, it comes approximately 13 PPP US dollar to 76 US dollar. This is per capita income of, so at 2021. So it is you can say the global middle class definition. It is whatever the, so I'm just saying it is not 5 lakh to 30 lakh rupees. So looking that it is current, if you look at, I can just say that the numbers is very important. Currently size is approximately 30% share in the population, which is expected, I mean, it's like 30% population in this one. So I am saying that this 30% population, why they are important? Because 30% population account from half of the income in the country, national income. 48% of the consumption and approximately 52% of saving. So, and against this, if you take rich, what we define rich, which is hardly 4%, whose income is 30 lakh and above, they account 23% of the income, 17% of the expenditure, and approximately 29% of the saving. I'm saying saving. And this saving, why I'm saying this data is important? This data gives not to actually important all the three pillars at one place from the one household. It is estimated from. So linkages between the how they are earning, how they are spending, how they are saving is very, very important to understand the two pillars what budget is saying actually in terms of how the one can just say that the particularly the inclusive development. And so here is the profile, who is earning how much. And the interesting thing is here is Nilanjan is bottom, what you have mentioned, you can say the 50% and below. I will say below the middle class, which is approximately two-third currently, is having, you can say 25% income and 1/3 of expenditure and approximately 18% of saving. So 60% versus 18% saving, 4 versus rich versus the 30% saving, and 30% with the 50% saving. This is actually the here policy or budget declaration need to be actually the focus. So what you want to give? You want to give the income, you want to enhance the consumption, or you want to actually enhance the saving by which at least you will get actually a lot of money to do the something like the infrastructure and other thing. So where I notice actually this is the, according to me, the crux of the story to understand. So what you want to fulfill through the NREGA, what you want to actually collect the if you are rebating the middle class from the tax, from where you are going to recover, it is going to recover through the consumption or through, means there is a lot. So what I treat, Nilanjan, is like these are the factual information. And what we have noticed is which you have mentioned like good and bad. Now, if one, these are the advantage thing, and like good thing, if I will say, then it is coming like the, if whatever growth 6 or 7% growth is going to happen, middle class is growing. There is no doubt at all. Middle class is growing. Either it is slower or this one declining. There is happening. There are certain like declining in the aspirers or this one richer. But only thing is that if 6-7% growth is going to happen in the country, then what actually the important thing we are looking at, the particularly in terms of the size, is the, let me say that the middle class size by the end of this decade will be approximately 700 million from the 400 million people. And there you can say deprivation will be approximately from the 200 million to approximately 80 million. So reduction of, you can say, 100 million. So what this 700 million, this is size which is coming in terms of purchasing power. this is good story, actually, good story to actually look at. But I have put one caveat here, Nilanjan, is the important thing is, like, if the political and the economic, I have just put one line in the first, in my report, first line, that this is going to happen if our actually the by if political and economic reform have their desired effect. This is quote unquote, actually. So political as well means anything, means one can, we are, as you mentioned, not discussing anything politics. So what is going to happen after 24 are the state and the, you can say, center relationship. All these are, but we have just looking at the economic growth and how the people are responding to our question, their consumption pattern. This is on the actually this side. But let me actually come to the larger goal. Now, okay, middle class is going grow. This is good story. This is what is actually the important opportunity. As I mentioned, the 52% currently in the aspirer category. Aspirer category means those having income between the, you can say, less than 5 lakh and over 2 lakh rupees. Okay, these are aspirer. They are knocking the door. So they are not actually that poverty, but they have just crossed the poverty. So it is half of the India. Here is the challenge, how the government and government budget and schemes next 1 decade, which is actually the Amrit Kaal, if we'll say, to actually this means like those who are knocking, how strong they are going to knock to the middle class, actually, in what actually capability and capacity. So transformation of aspirer to the middle class is the biggest story for the next 10 years. So I am saying that here, the most important thing is what I just say is the particularly because the focus should be the aspirer currently like the seventh. So how can these people are able to create the, means like in terms of infrastructure, get the infrastructure in terms of schools, hospitals, or the infrastructure to at least utilize, because when income is going good, they are going to demand will be more. Are we able to meet their demand through the existing actually infrastructure? And if you go from the countryside, from the metros to countryside, so what we have actually the observed is the, which is not good sign. Rising income fails to bridge gulf between rich and poor state. It is, if you compare the Bimaru state versus the southern state, the per capita income differences is going up and up and up. So where the growth is going to happen. And the same time, it is mentioned that why the number of middle class and affluent people has risen across India, the eastern and central region remain far behind the south and west. So I am saying that these are the challenges which need to be addressed through this type of budget allocation, like what actually TK was talking and you are talking about, the state versus central relationship. So if somebody is getting, somebody is not getting, means like how the inclusive. So that's why I mentioned, let me take actually the first actually inclusive development and how the last mile. And the last thing I will say that a lot looking at the learning from the pandemic and the way people have responded their income and well-being, social security and economic security of the bottom 40% is very, very crucial to even extract the growth from the top one. Because these are the people, those who are actually the pumping growth through the middle and the rich. And the middle is cementing agent, which is using both rich actually as poor, both to make society inclusive. So I will say that if we'll go by all these actually this one, so major challenge will be creating a better conducive environment where the people can feel they are included in the growth and they are getting benefit from this, that requires actually the attention by all stakeholders from the state, local government, central government, even including the individual. If we want to say that, like India is growing, India is going to 5 trillion, everything is fine, everything is achievable. But most important thing is how we can develop a better society, inclusive society, where actually the people will have much better and healthy life. So with these words, actually the first instance, I will take a pause here, and let me actually take a question. A lot of numbers are here are there, but I do not want to go into actually numbers.
No, thank you, Rajesh. This is fascinating sets of number, because I remember the last time the government did the consumption expenditure survey was 2011-12. Although we have had another round during 2017-18, but those numbers were not are not in public. So in that way, I think your contribution is great. At least trying to understand in what way the income distribution function may have changed over a period of time. And what is shocking to know that your Gini coefficient has increased from 0.36 to 0.5. Anyway, I have 2 or 3 other point to add on that we will do during our discussion. Now, let me turn back to my last and next speaker, Mr. Sharma. If you can take on the floor, please. You are muted.
Thank you, Professor Niranjan, and thank you, IMPRI, for inviting me to express my viewpoint on Budget 23-24. And I would like to appreciate my friend Mr. T.K. Arun and Dr. Rajesh Shukla ji so nicely providing the great insights about the Union Budget 23-24. I would like to start from our expectations, what we were expecting from the budget 23-24 industry expectations from the budget. Number one, we were expecting some adequate PLI fund for the MSME sector and efforts for the capacity utilization, like enhancement to the consumption. And our third expectation was more robust ease of doing business at the ground level, particularly for the MSME sector. And our fourth expectation was rationalization of direct taxes for the middle incomes, because middle incomes are facing the maximum incidence of taxation. If you go by the numbers across the countries, we are rating our middle income at a peak rate, like 15 lakh comes under the middle income, and we are imposing 30% tax on the same. And this is only according to the last regime of taxation, 6 multiples from the 2.5 lakh to 15 lakh. But in US, it is more than 25 multiples. So middle income is taxed at a high rate. Then we had suggested reforms for the MSME sector. Like MSME's credit facilitation is still problematic. That was our suggestion. And suggestions for the health and education sector, that there must be more focus on the primary health education, primary health centers. Like sometimes the people face difficulties to go to the dispensary, and there is no dispensary available even within the radius of 2 kilometers in a population area. So we had suggested that there must be a dispensary in the radius of 2 kilometers at least in India where there is a population. So that was our suggestion. And thereafter, we saw that economic survey is very promising, and the economic survey comes out with the 5 major points. That is, number one, India is a resilient economy. We grew from the lows to highest. We were the fastest moving economy in the 2021-22 at 8.7%. Thereafter, on a high base, we grew at the rate of 7%. And thereafter, anticipation is that we will grow somewhere between 6 to 6.8%. So high on high, that resilience is becoming more robust for the Indian economy. And second, India is a bright spot in the global ecosystem. India will drive the growth trajectory of the world economic system in the coming times. And third was the outcome of sound demand. That demand during the last 4 or 5 months has emerged so significantly that it can support the economic growth at this level without the support of the external sector. Like if the exports slow down, then the domestic demand, sound demand will support the economic growth trajectory somewhere between 6 to 6.8%. And fifth was the MSME credit growth. That credit to MSME sector is growing more than 30% during the first 9 months of the current financial year with the facilitation of the ECLGS scheme and good balance sheets of the banking sector. So these were the major findings of the economic survey. And at this backdrop, now budget is with us, and budget has provided great insights, and we are happy that most of our aspirations have been met. Firstly, government has provided a great push to the consumption. This budget is a consumption-led growth. Like they have provided a capex of 10 lakh crore government capex, capital investments that will enhance the consumption trajectory. And the consumption is happening, then the people will demand more goods and services, then the factories will be able to spend more, and they will expand their production possibilities and deploy more workforce in their factories. That has happened during the recent months also. That's why the growth is becoming robust. And the longer term thought process, like budget is a blueprint also for a developed economy. Like they have provided the 4 opportunities. If you go by the initial statement of the finance minister, they have focused 4 things. Firstly, the economic empowerment of women. Second, Vishwakarma, like support to the karigars and the handicrafters and the painting makings and all these the labor facilitation to them. That is called the Vishkarma. Then third pillar is tourism, and fourth is the green growth. These are the 4 thoughts behind this budget. These are the 4 thoughts for the longer term, for to go towards the developed economy. And on at the backdrop of these four thoughts, they have provided Saptarishi for the current year. What are the Saptarishis? First is inclusive development. Second is reaching the last mile. Third is infrastructure and investments. Fourth is unleashing the potential. Fifth is green growth, and sixth is youth power, and seventh is financial sector. And for the inclusive development, as mentioned by Dr. Rajesh Shukla ji, that this is a great thing. In inclusive development, they have provided 20 lakh crore credit facilitation to the agriculture sector, colleges for the nursing, and facilitation to the health sector, Ayush. All these developmental activities have been provided for the inclusive. And they have done a great thing for the reaching the last mile, which is by providing the PM Awas Yojana, that is with the allocation of 79,000 crore. I think this is a great thing which has happened in this budget of the economy, and really reaching the last mile that has been focused by the government. Then infrastructure and investment, like capital investments of the 10 lakh crore, which is a great thing. We must say that government has actually provided the push to the economy. This will create aggregate demand in the country and strengthen the economic growth. Then unleashing the potential, like they have mentioned that they removed 39,000 compliances during the last year. And now they are more open to decriminalize the offences. More than 100 offences have been decriminalized. And this was a great demand of the industry. And we at PhD Chamber received more than 500 representation in a year to decriminalize the minor offences, because these minor offences can put somebody in a jail. So that's why they were again and again demanding that check bouncing, all these minor offences must not be in the imprisonment category. They must be in the maximum financial fine category. So they have considered this, and we appreciate the government that decriminalization is again becoming at the radar of the government. Then green growth. They already provided 19,700 push to the green energy. Now they have earmarked 35,000 crore for the green energy and expansion in the investment environment. Then youth power, they have focused very well, like the youth malls in the cities and unity malls and all these things, cultural things will happen in the youth power. Then the financial sector, they have provided a great push once again to the MSME sector. Like MSME credit growth was growing at the rate of 30% in the first 9 months. Now they have again provided 9,000 crore for the facilitation to the ECLGS credit, so that credit is disbursed more and more to the MSME sector. That is a great thing which has happened for the MSME sector. And what is lacking, what is missed in this budget? A great push to the middle class, to the relief for the taxation. Tax remains, according to the old slab, tax remains same. They are rated 30% at the income of 15 lakh, which is very high and impacting the personal disposable income and again impacting the consumption trajectory. Though government itself is doing a lot of consumption in the economy to support the economic growth, but that should also come from the people. They should invest in the durables. They should buy the durables. Consumption expenditure should increase like anything. And the one great thing which we must appreciate, and we are saying again and again, that despite an agrarian economy, our participation in agriculture's world economy is very less. We are only 0.5% of the total world agri and food imports. Total world agri and food imports are more than $1,300 billion. And last year, we exported $50 billion to the world market. And this was an increase of 40% over the previous year. Though we are increasing, but still we are lagging behind despite an agrarian economy. Now they have provided this great thing that there will be agri startups. They will provide know-how to the farmers. They will provide the adequate information and facilitation and know-how, innovation to the farmers, and they will be the rural entrepreneurs, rural and startups. So they will provide the agriculture startups. So I think that is a great thing that will push the agricultural entrepreneurship and rural incomes. And if the rural incomes are increasing, then the manufacturing sector will also grow, because they will buy the manufactured products and demand will increase and the factories will also expand. So we have to start from the base, and agriculture sector, we always appreciate that this must be supported and strengthened so that demand is happening in the manufacturing and services, and economy is becoming strong, and people are shifting from the agriculture to the manufacturing. So people will only shift from agriculture to manufacturing if the manufacturing products demand is there. That's why the people in the manufacturing sector will be able to expand their factory production capacity utilization and production possibilities. If the demand is happening, then they will deploy more people in their factories for the labor, for the for skilled, unskilled, and semi-skilled workforce in their factories from the agriculture sector. So firstly, we have to support the agriculture sector with a lot of reforms like government is doing during the last 3-4 years. So with these words, I will stop here, as already a lot of discussed by my friend TK Arun elaborated all the things and the strengths and weaknesses of the current economic environment. Then again, Dr. Rajesh provided so many insights with the support of adequate data. So I have mentioned the industry points and strengths and weaknesses and our expectations. Most of expectations have been fulfilled, but still we need a great push to the consumption segment so that capacity utilization is happening. Once I was talking about to a great entrepreneur, they are in business since the last 125 years. I was asking that why the capacity capex is not happening in the private sector. Then they said we can work in the difficult environment also, but the demand must happen. If demand is there, with the lesser ease of doing business, we can move forward. But if the demand is not there, why should we deploy more machines in our factories if our capacity utilization is already 60 or 70%. So if the demand is there, consumption is there, we are ready to produce any production, even in the difficult environment, even in the high cost of capital, even in the bad ease of doing business. So that was the answer by that great entrepreneur. So thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and thanks for inviting.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for giving an overview of the budget. So let's do this. First, let me have some question starting with Mr. Sharma, then I will go to Rajesh Shukla, Mr. Shukla, and then followed by that, Mr. Arun. So you mentioned about this, the various aspect in what way the industry is growing. But one thing which was missing in your presentation is why is it that our exports are not picking up in comparison to the import? You know, the current account deficit is on the rise, and what we can do to increase the competitiveness of our export. And do you think the PLI scheme of the world is actually helping to make our export competitive?
I think exports competitiveness is not impacted by the domestic factors. Now, this is impacted by the global economic environment. As mentioned by TK Arunji also and Rajesh, that world demand is slowing down. And the growth projections for the world economy is decelerating significantly. And our growth partners, if we consider our 25 top export destinations, their growth is decelerating from 5% in 21-22 to 3.5% in 22-23 and 2.4% in 23-24. So great deceleration in their growth numbers. We have averaged out our top 25 export destinations starting from US. So demand is not happening. That's why the export trajectory is now squeezing. And I hope that we will be in the positive trajectory once again in next year also. But growth will not be that much whopping that we are growing at 20%, 30% in the exports. But the services exports is a major support because services slow after a continuation of this recession. Services do not slow in a shorter period of time because you can't withdraw services immediately, but you can withdraw your buying of the durables immediately, but services can't be withdrawn immediately. So services exports will do better as compared with merchandise exports. Like current year, we will be achieving at around more than 25% growth in the services. Last year, we posted a export number of $251 billion. And for the current year, we will post a number of more than $300 billion. So services exports are robust and they will provide a great handholding to the merchandise to address the CAD and overall balance of payments.
And what's your take on the PLI scheme?
Yes, PLI, we are worried about the PLI allocations that I would like to mention that like the middle enterprises or the small enterprises, they are getting less in the PLI. So there must be some separate allocation. We have recommended the government, and once again we are doing that there must be a separate allocation for the MSMEs in the PLI scheme, so that a large pie is not taken by the large conglomerates. There must be some pie for the MSMEs too.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sharma, for your time. Let me now turn on to Mr. Shukla. One of the things, in fact, I was so much intrigued with your data. One of the things that you mentioned that for the high income people, you know, the saving is low. Can this be because they are also investing in alternative, for instance, in stock market, in bonds, gold, or land, which may explain why their saving is low? That is number one, the first point, first question which I have for you. The second question is, when you are actually looking into the, trying to categorize into middle income and the high income and the low income, I think you also need to control for the type of economy you are in. For instance, in the US, the poverty level is much higher compared to what you see there in India. And therefore, this wide variation, when you say that the middle income is between 5 to 30 lakhs, you can actually bring it down to a much more narrow margin, provided you control for the cost of living, or for that matter, the basic minimum wage that one needs to survive. So these are the 2 points which I have, but of course, we'll have more discussion on your data, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks, Niranjan. Miss, like let me take the what number I have mentioned. Number mentioned about the saving. What I have mentioned is actually the looking at the saving rate. Let me again mention. In terms of saving, I have mentioned that for high income, which we are considering 30 lakh and above, their share in the population is 4%.
Right.
Means like if suppose there are 140 crore people, then their size is approximately, it is coming 56 million people as of now. But their share in the saving, if India is saving suppose 100 rupees, and the 100 rupees saving means it is either in form of financial saving or the physical saving. So 29% means 30%. So 4% population of India, rich people, is having 30% share in the saving. So the means high income saving is much higher actually. So it is at par actually if you take the curve actually. So if I am understanding, high income household is not saving less. First thing.
Okay.
Means I have mentioned, let me again repeat, because this is important in terms of what I am saying is the 4% share in the population.
30%.
They are having 23% of the income, 17% of the expenditure, but 29-30% in the saving. Middle class is having 30% share in the population, half of the income, and approximately 48% of expenditure and 52% of saving. Rest, I have mentioned, aspirers and poor or destitute, which is a 2/3, having 27% income, 35% expenditure, but 18% saving. So it is like the 60% bottom, 60% is having 18% saving. Yeah. This is one. Second thing, as you mentioned, like the taking the classes. This is explanation for this one. But let me say that our data in the report, it is given there are 7-8 classes. So you will find that like middle, if you are taking middle class, there are 2 classes, 5 to 15 lakh and 15 lakh to 30 lakh. And rich is having like the 30 lakh is having 4 classes going up to 2 crore rupees actually. So it is a whole spectrum of the income distribution from the bottom of pyramid, which I can say annual household income is 1.25 lakh per annum to 2 crore rupees. For the presentation we are keeping this. So entire profile is presented, each segment. So you can find, if suppose if you are looking certain segment, so you'll find where they are located. How many people in metros, how many in boomtown, how many in the other. So most of the poor is located in rural areas, but you will find that the rich people, where you go, it is going the metro phenomenon. But let me make actually another point, which is actually it might be interesting. The next actually the 1 decade, the real story is going to emerge from the tier 2 city, means like tier 2 city of this one, and the developed rural, which is a periphery of the urban center, which is approximately 10% of the. And let me say, developed rural is having higher income than even your second tier cities. So one has to just look these actually complexes when you are means like doing all these things, which is very important to actually the look at. So developed rural will be the big, what I call is these are the rural tigers. How one can bring into the like income tax or something, like how one can utilize this fulcrum to increase the growth.
And how you're measuring the Gini coefficient? Which percentile are you looking at when you are computing the Gini coefficient?
Gini coefficient is income Gini. This is income Gini.
Yeah. So when you say it has increased 0.36 to 0.5, are we talking about the difference between the bottom 1% with vis-a-vis the top 1%?
No, entire distribution. Entire distribution. And this is what I am saying is and this is what actually I also mentioned in one of the, I mentioned economic. When you are having higher growth or lower growth, both, the income inequality is obvious to increase actually, because absorption or growth is not equal in the you can say in the distribution system. Even if you are having 9% growth, it still will find that it is, so it should be balanced actually, the what growth and inflation you are targeting if you want to maximum inclusion. So both are good actually. So I am saying that with the higher inflation, higher actually inequality doesn't mean, but 2020 higher inequality is obvious actually. But it might be because we are conducting another round of survey. It can look at the post-COVID. It is when how much time is. And the last thing I will say that the demand, which is rural demand, which you see the means these people, those who are bottom actually, the Nilanjan, particularly the bottom, you can say 2 lakh rupees, 80% in the rural Indias. Okay, they borrow money to feed their stomach. So their income minus expenditure, they are earning 100 rupees, spending 114 rupees. 14 rupees they are borrowing to meet their expenses from mostly all the informal sources. So during the pandemic, because of the situation, these people borrowed the money. Currently they are earning, but now they are repaying the loan or debt, which is informally they have taken to feed their stomach. That's why the consumption is not picking. And according to my actually the calculation, still it will take some time to revive actually, because and people are not going to consume luxury habit until unless they are free from the debt. So it will happen. I believe it will take another 1 year to pick up the you can say the consumption, at least bottom 40%.
Thank you very much. Now coming back to TK, I really liked your presentation. The only thing maybe was I also think in addition to demonetization, you also have this pandemic as an exogenous shock, which has actually curtailed the consumption expenditure, as pointed out by Rajesh as well. How much is there any way to differentiate? Because demonetization, in one thing which the government has done is now they have made as a taxpayer, it is much more easier for me to comply or pay tax, which was earlier not the case. And they're also monitoring it quite properly so that people cannot evade tax. So I think demonetization in some way was a signal that, look, if you are not willing to pay tax, at the same time, government on its part is trying to ensure that it becomes easier for you to pay tax, by reducing all this. That is something we also see in terms of the new form where there is practically no exemption. You get a higher 7 lakhs rupees, up to 7 lakhs rupees of benefit, So I think at the time of crisis, because you also mentioned that the government is coming back and rather than letting private sector having its free hand. But as we have seen, not only in India, but also in South Korea, New Zealand, and other parts of the world, during the time of pandemic, when there were no participation from the private sector, the government actually had to step in, and try to what we call the Keynesian spirit of pumping up the demand, So that is, I think, one point, if you can explain to us that how much of what you see as government intervention is because of post-demonetization, post-pandemic, because the private sector were not coming into picture, and because of that, government has to step in.
Yeah. Before I come to your questions, let me just compliment Dr. Shukla, Rajesh ji. I mean, he has fantastic work with data. I know very few people who have as good a grip on the empirical details of the Indian economy as he has. I just want to comment on this inequality business. I think we are all colonized by the Western discourse on inequality. Oxfam comes out of the figure various other Western sources come out with this because worrying about the increasing inequality. No person in India wakes up in the morning wondering if today the income disparity between himself and Mukesh Ambani is going to widen or not. What he is worried about is will he be able to meet the minimum requirements of his family? If somebody falls in his family, will he be able to take that person to a hospital? So the absolute level of income is what counts most for most people in this country. And only when you have reached that level where you have crossed the poverty threshold, you have become a human being. You are no longer sucked in by the drudgery of subsistence and are able to give free rein to your creativity as a human being. Do you start worrying about other things? Whereas, as Rajesh's figures show, 60% of the population still haven't reached that threshold. So what we need to worry about is raising absolute levels of income at the bottom of the social pyramid. Once they have escaped poverty, then we can worry about income disparities. Now, growth, as he said, increases income disparity. Now, for the sake of curtailing income disparity and keeping the Gini coefficient constant, if you want to curtail growth, we'll be doing the greatest disservice to the people of this country. That's coming back to what is wrong with growth and why what we should do. Now, it was not just the demonetization thing. We also had this entire problem with bank balance sheets, what Ram Rajan called the twin deficit problem. You had enormous amount of lending by banks, some of them not so wise lending, which have resulted in loans going bad, not being able to be serviced. And companies on their balance sheet had debt they could not service. So they also were incapable of actually creating fresh investment. So investment, which in the first decade of this millennium had reached as high as say 33-34% of GDP, has remained below 30%, 27, 26, 28% of GDP during the last 8 years of this government. And it has climbed to 29% according to the latest CSO figures for 2022-23, the advanced estimates, which will be a good thing if it does, and it needs to push it up further. So the inability of banks to lend because of the buildup of bad loans was one major factor inhibiting investment and therefore growth. Now, bank balance sheets are more or less repaired and they are in a position to lend. So I think we can expect some realistic growth in investment this time around. And as far as state role, I'm not against the state playing a role in the economy. There are very many sectors where the state has to play a major role, not only in welfare, but in social infrastructure, but also in some cases in critical physical infrastructure, technology gaps, etc. But this government is has a fancy for throwing up programs. This program, that program, every letter of the alphabet in various combinations and permutations are being created into some program or the other. So these many programs by the government also ultimately end up the government playing a role in the economy which it doesn't need to. When something is best done by the private sector, you should let the private sector do it. Like I said, when commercial services are in question, you let the private sector do it. Where there isn't a sufficient incentive for the private sector to come forward and carry out that activity, the government might offer incentive or itself step in to perform that task. But the government is getting into various kinds of sectors where the government doesn't need to get. And I'm not talking about during the pandemic and that kind of situation. The United States, ruled by the Republican Party, created a fiscal deficit of 24% of GDP during the pandemic. So this is, nobody is sticking to any orthodoxy in this case. Things are pragmatic. But we also need to step up a government role, but it should be intelligently crafted and it should be effective in how they intervene. That's a point I was saying. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, TK. Actually, that's bring down to that point you were saying, that how to make it sustainable, because you can borrow and start investing. But beyond a point, you should also try to usher in the private sector, come and put their own, what we call crowd in as opposed to crowd out. So thank you very much, all three of my panelists. Now let me see from the attendees if there are any further question. If you have any question, you can write in the chat box. Well, I think there is no further question. So with that, let me conclude this session and hand it back to Tripta.
Sir, actually, I have one question.
Okay, hi Fiza, please go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists, and I mean, this was a very insightful discussion. So my question is regarding the MSMEs and the loans that was introduced in the budget. So, I mean, they have also given the MSMEs a limit up to which the banks can lend them loans without collateral. So how will this impact the banks or the bad loans, or what we say? I mean, because of the asymmetric information that is prevalent in what we have studied in economics. So how this will impact the economy overall if MSMEs default or something like that happen?
So your question is directed to whom? We have three experts.
Anyone who can answer it.
Okay. TK or SP?
I can
Okay,
venture an
go
answer.
ahead. Yeah.
See, the smaller the guy, the more he values access to credit. The microfinance lending recovery rate is 99%. Or used to be before multiple guys came and started lending to the same borrower. Because that is the only access to credit which could be a lifeline for that person. In India, the MSME sector gets only 15% of credit requirement from the formal financial sector. All of them have to borrow from informal sources, and they pay a very exorbitant rate of interest on their loans. So if at all they are able to get any money from banks, they will nurture it, they will service it, they will make sure that they are able to get another loan. They have no incentive to spoil their credit relations with the bank. So I wouldn't worry about that. It's actually the big guys who think that they can get away with not paying who are the problem.
Does it answer your question, Fiza?
Yeah, definitely, sir. So one more question, and that is for you, T. sir. You mentioned that fiscal deficit is not going to be a problem as such, as much it is highlighted. But according to my understanding of the budget that I heard yesterday, so with the new tax slabs and the new tax rates coming in, what I have read, around 35,000 crores would be a loss to the government in terms of tax revenue. And obviously government expenditure has risen in this budget, so which is going to rise in the next coming financial year. So I mean, this is going to impact the deficit. So I mean, I wasn't able to connect the dots there.
See, lowering tax rates on certain segments doesn't necessarily mean that you collect fewer taxes or a lower amount of tax in the aggregate. Tax as a proportion of GDP for the central government is budgeted 11% last year. I mean, that is what they achieved, and is budgeted 11% for the coming year. So there is no drop in tax revenue. In fact, India needs to be collecting far more tax as a proportion of GDP than it is right now. The OECD average tax collection as a proportion of GDP is something like 34%. Our collection is 17%, central and states combined. It's very low. Unless we collect more tax, we will not be able to spend on the essential requirements of the economy and the people. And we need to actually utilize the data and the audit trails generated by GST to collect tax even more efficiently. We are not being able to do that as yet. There is some progress. They're able to mine the data and improve compliance, which is why GST collections have been going up steadily. That was, of course, inflation, but compliance also improved. if you do that further, I'm sure we'll be able to raise much more data and collect much more tax.
Thank you so much, sir.
Are there any further questions which I can take or our panelists can take?
I think Rajesh wanted to say something.
Rajesh.
Yeah. You are muted, Rajesh.
Just one or two key point actually, which might be when we are discussing the taxes. You see, the one of the things actually, the income is growing, and the whatever the thing. Another challenge is how the government is going to bring the more people in the tax compliances actually. That is bigger issue than what it looks like. Let me say that from our data, what it is showing. For example, take Delhi. Example I am giving. 10% of Delhi population live into so-called 256 villages into the Delhi. Okay, Delhi rural areas. Let me say, according to my estimate and what we have estimated, concentration and intensity of crorepati in rural Delhi is higher than the urban Delhi. So I'm saying that those who are in developed rural TK, we have noticed 10% actually the entire household in the developed rural, where the agriculture contribution to the income is hardly 26%, and the rest is non-agriculture income actually. So what my submission is something. One is like how we can increase or enhance the compliances, number of compliances. That is one. Second thing is also, Nilanjan, is important. When income is growing, the consumer or household moving from the government services actually, like the private schools, private hospitals, and other thing. So as you become the rich, you are not actually using the government. Even people are even not interested to earlier use the Air India actually. So I am saying that those who are opting the private. So here is again loss to the government actually in terms of taxes and other. So I'm just saying these two things, as income is going to grow in next 10 years, 15 years, or 25 years. So my concern always comes is how you are going to fulfill the desire or requirement or need of growing this middle class. That is another challenge, what I wanted to just add.
In fact, Rajesh, quickly, I want to ask you, are you therefore seeing that Piketty kind of narrative in the rural Delhi? Because what Piketty was trying to suggest is because you are a landed class, or maybe because you have many fixed asset, as you mentioned, that it's not that it's not small versus large farmers. It's because of other things that you have so much concentration. So the point is, what type of concentration of asset are you seeing over there?
Actually, this is actually what I am talking about. This is annual income actually. Annual income asset.
Oh, okay. It's a flow concepts.
This is a flow concept because we have to the what is your annual household income. So it is not related with wealth and any other. But as you are saying is in terms of the looking at the like 70 years, 80 years of defining the even rural is big question. It need to be seen actually properly and need to recast. Because in that case, and what TK was telling, what you are suggesting, what even we are learning, the genuine rural population, genuine actually the people are sometimes actually their benefit, their things are going somewhere else actually. So I'm saying that time has come to look into our past exercises, which is not, if you are like ruling out 5,000 actually you can say compliance. Why not look the fundamentals also? You are targeting the rural, because there is no definition of rural in India. It is urban is defined, rest is rural actually.
Okay, since we are running out of time, I would like to end this note because it's a fascinating discussion. Because I remember when I passed out from Delhi University, we used to live in a place called Sarai because we had to give up the hostel, And Sarai is a place where one person would have 4 or 5 houses, and we used to envy those Jat household owners. saying that how much money income he has because he's just earning money through renting out his property. So it's remind me that type of story you were telling about. So anyway, thank you very much. So over to you, Tripta, and let's conclude this.
Thank you so much, sir. So as we come to an end of today's discussion, I, Tripta Behra, researcher IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE, for today's deliberation. A panel discussion on Amrit Kaal and the Union Budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our chair and moderator, Professor Nilanjan Banig, and of course to our panelists, Mr. T.K. Arun, Dr. S.P. Sharma, and Dr. Rajesh Shukla, for taking part and enlightening us throughout. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. You may also find more discussions on public finance in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of Public Finance Towards Accountability, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in the future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We also invite you to IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of the Union Budget for the fiscal year 2023-24, being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. With that, wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.